Okay, turn the screw, chapter 4. Here's some lecture notes. So chapter 4 begins pretty quickly with a nice little allusion where it talks about, was there a secret at Bly, a mystery of Adolphu, or an insane and unmentionable relative kept in an unsuspected confinement? It's a nice play on a famous book by Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Adolpho. And basically, it's a shout out to Gothic pieces, Gothic literature. Remember, Gothic literature is going to be dealing with the supernatural, is going to be dealing with psychological elements that we see in Turn of the Screw. And definitely, Henry James knows that, is playing with the Gothic, because this is him playing with the Gothic story. So we have that right away. She talks about her seeing Peter Quint, who we're going to find out a little bit later was Peter Quint. When she says, I had my collision. She enters, looking at her emotional state. Agitation at interval certainly had held me and driven me. For I must, in circling about the place, have walked 3 miles. But I was to be, later on, so much more overwhelmed that this mere dawn of alarm was comparatively human chill. A couple of interesting things in that line there. Right away, we have the idea of her being agitated, her agitation coming out in this continual circling and circumlocution that she's doing physically, walking in circles. But also the idea of the human chill, that contrasts the inhuman chill that we get from the quote-unquote ghosts. So she has that element being brought out in that line. Good line there. Then look at how it's written together as well. We have the broken up elements, agitation, comma, and interval, comma, certainly help me and driven me, comma, for I must, comma, and certainly about the place, comma, have walked 3 miles, semicolon, but I was to be, comma, later on, comma, so much more overwhelmed that this mere dawn of alarm was a comparatively human chill. But that kind of agitation coming out in the broken, fragmented elements of that sentence. Okay. When she sees Miss Gross, she thinks about talking to her, right? She knew nothing, whatever that could bear upon the instant that they're ready for her. She thinks about what to do. She has an inward resolution not to talk about it. Okay. Originally, she begins to think, she doesn't get to the ghost idea, right? She does some of her duties, she goes around, she acts like everything's normal. She says, when I had to shut myself up to think, it was not so much yet that I was more nervous than I could bear to be, as I was remarkably afraid of becoming so. So we have this agitation, we have the idea that she has this nervous dread of what's happening. She says, for the truth I had now to turn over was simply and clearly the truth that I could arrive at no account whatever of the visitor with whom I had been inexplicably and yet it seemed to me so intimately concerned. She then feels that her senses are sharpened. The shock I had suffered must have sharpened all my senses. I felt sure at the end of 3 days, the result of mere closer attention, that I had not been practiced upon by the servants, nor made the object of any game. So she feels like nobody's been teasing her, or that this is some result of some kind of strange play that anybody was making on her. Instead, she comes to the conclusion that someone had taken a liberty rather gross. That somebody had just entered the house, come inside, some unscrupulous traveler, curious in old houses, had made his way in unobserved, enjoyed the prospect from the best point of view, and then stolen out as he came. If he had given me such a bold hard stare, that was but a part of his indiscretion. That was just some weird kind of perverse reason that this person came into the house. That's what her resolution is. It goes on a little bit. As you can see, I didn't highlight anything in this next little section where she kind of talks about what to do with Miles and Flora. Talks about the fact that she's very happy with it, that she enjoys it to a great deal. There was to be no great prose, it appeared, and no long grind. So I could work not be charming, that present itself as daily beauty. It was all the romance of the nursery and the poetry of the schoolroom. Basically, the interest that the children had was inspirational to her. Where she keeps on finding discoveries and really just appreciating her time with them. She talks about Miles' deep obscurity continued to cover the region of the boy's conduct at school, where we have this idea that we still have no idea what it is that he did. It seems absurd that he had any kind of indiscretion, but we know that clearly he was kicked out for some reason. Hopefully we find some of that a little bit later. To go along with her somewhat inappropriate way of looking, or not inappropriate, but prejudiced way of looking at Miles. She says, "My conclusion bloomed there with the real rose flush of his innocence. He was only too fine and fair for the little horrid unclean school world, and he had paid a price for it. I reflected acutely that the sense of such differences, such superiorities of quality, always on the part of the majority, which could include even stupid, sordid headmasters, turned infallibly to the vindictive." So here she is, thinking the children, like it says, had a gentleness. It was their only fault, never made Miles a muff. Thinking of them, how shall I express it, almost impersonal, certainly quite unpunishable. They were like the cherubs of the anecdote. Cherubs being little angels, little angel babies, who had more at any rate nothing to whack. I remember playing with Miles in especial as if he had, as it were, no history. They had never done anything quite wrong. It says if he had been wicked, he would have caught it. I should have caught it by the rebound. I should have found the trace. And like it says, he was therefore an angel. Okay. He never speaks of his school. He never talks about a friend, his master. He says, for my part, I was quite too much disgusted to allude to them. And she then concludes that she was under the spell, and the wonderful part is that even at the time I perfectly knew I was. She very happily gives herself over to this delusion that she has, where she cannot see any wrong, where she cannot see anything with them that would be questionable. Now, contrast this paradise that she's living at to what's going on at her home. Disturbing letters from home, where things are not going well. She says, what things in the world mattered? That was a question I used to put to my scrappy retirements. I was dazzled by their loveliness. But notice that, these disturbing letters could definitely be having some kind of effect on the governess's psychology. That if she is soon to have some kind of turn for the worse, or if there's some kind of problem beneath the surface that's manifesting itself. Here we see that. Okay. We go into a sharp, kind of odd moment come along. Because it had rained for a pretty long time. Like it says, I had arranged Miss Gross that should the evening show improvement, we would attend the late service. The rain happily stopped and prepared for our walk, which through the park and by the good road of the village would be a matter of 20 minutes. So they decided to go over for the walk. Before she leaves, right, she looks for the gloves. She talks about sitting with the children at their tea, served on Sundays by exception of that cold, clean temple of mahogany and brass. The grown-up dining room. But notice that she's having this kind of contrast there. The adult world, the child world, that she's living in this kind of child world, and she's caught up in this beauty and innocence with it. But there's always this up and down, this contrast between what is good and what is bad. Okay. She then sees, for the second time, Peter Quint. She becomes aware of a person on the other side of the window, looking straight in. One step in the room had sufficed. My vision was instantaneous. It was all there. So this is going to be her second great shock. We had a great period where everything was beautiful, wonderful, having fun with the kids. They can't do any wrong. And then the ghost appears, this manifestation, this very negative manifestation, which bothers her, right? He appeared thus again with, I won't say greater distinctness, for that was impossible, but with a nearness that represented a forward stride, and of course it made me, as I met him, catch my breath and turn cold. He was the same and seen this time as he had been seen before, from the waist up. The window through the dining room was on the ground floor, not going down to the terrace on which he stood. So here she sees him, and she feels closer to him, as if his spirit or whatever is getting closer and more intense. Says how intense the form had been. He remained but a few seconds, long enough to convince me he also saw and recognized. It was as if I had been looking at him for years and known him always. Kind of a strange comment there. Once again, a lot of this is going on inside the governess's head. How much of this is really happening? How much of this is some kind of odd manifestation of her imagination, of the negative things that are going on in her life? That ambiguity, once again. Okay. And I hope you notice the repetition up here. He was the same. He was the same. Seen, and he had been seen before. That kind of repetition to show the shock and the dread that she feels. She then feels quite certain. On the spot there came to me the added shock of certitude that it was not for me he had come there. He had come for someone else, which is going to create our moments of knowing about the kids and seeing a little bit more about the sketchiness they're in. Okay. This flash of knowledge, for it was knowledge in the midst of dread, produced in me the extraordinary effect, stars I stood there, a sudden vibration of duty and courage. Okay. So she praises herself, gives herself a certain element of importance here. Once again, going along with what we've been talking about. She goes to see him. She bounds straight out of the door, reached out of the house, got an instant upon the drive, and passing along the terrace fast as I could rush, turned her corner and come in full sight. Notice the way that sentence is written. The movement is there, the broken, fragmented steps, the jump. Okay. She's kind of happy that she doesn't see him. She loses track of time. She can't see, like I said, the terrace and the whole place, the long garden beyond it. All I could see of the park were empty with a great emptiness. There were shrubberies and big trees, but I remember the clear assurance I felt that none of them concealed him. Right? So it's all in her head. She has this clear assurance I felt that none of them concealed him. She doesn't check. She doesn't go look. She doesn't try to find anything else. She has a sense that what she thinks is right. Miss Gross comes in and she shocks Miss Gross. It says she saw me as I had seen my own visitant. She pulled up short as I had done. I gave her something of the shock that I had received. She turned white, and this made me ask myself if I had blanched as much. She stared in short and retreated on just my lines. I knew she had then passed out and come around to me, and that I should presently meet her. She waits for her, and this is when we kind of come to our conclusion here in this chapter. She has this final line, which goes into the ambiguity of Miss Gross, so I think we need to point it out. She says, "There's only one I take space to mention. I wonder why she should be scared. Why is she scared of the governess? What elements has the governess produced to make Miss Gross scared?" Alright, we will continue with chapter 5 next.